Welcome, everybody, to episode 18 of Agentic SaaS Talks. We're diving in today into the concept of deploying your applications, which is one of the more fundamental questions that all startups or enterprise organizations in general will eventually reach. First, you kind of build your app, then you kind of have one or two customers connect to your app, and you're fine. But then you start getting into this concept of multi-tenancy, and then you start getting into some data sovereignty issues, and then you start realizing that, hey, my agentic app needs to get access to data, and this data exists in lots of different places. And so how do I start, ensuring that my application has access to these things, that the security and multi-tenancy or data sovereignty or all these different rules and laws are respected. And so it's a really complex topic. It's a really fun topic. And there's been a lot of changes in this space in the last couple of months. And so we're gonna actually talk through all of those today. And I'm joined today with some standard hosts on the show and some of the perfect people to talk through this conversation. We've got Armen and Marcus and Kamal. And hopefully, if you've seen the show before, you've heard their intros. I'll let them kind of intro as we go instead of kind of doing a standard pause, because I actually really kind of want to dive into the topic, and let's kind of get to the point and to the meat of the conversation. And so for that, Armen, I'm actually going to turn to you first. Um, when we were originally building out SaaS applications or applications in general, hey, the concept is easy. You would just build an app and host it on a cloud, and people would connect to your app, and life was good. I mean, why is it now more complicated? Why are all these other topics out there? We have multi-tenancy and now there's BYOA and BYOC and SaaS Anywhere. When all these different topics were introduced, why are we just trying to sell more stuff, or what's the point of this?
Recently, by the way, it's nice to be here. So, Michael, thanks a lot for the invitation. I really enjoy, I'm looking forward for the next 1 hour with you, Marcus and Kamal. To go back to your question, so when preparing for one of my presentations back in summer this year, I found a shocking fact, right? So I found that in average, company relies on 2.2 cloud provider. And funny enough, that's not actually a shocking fact. The shocking fact is actually that I didn't realize that AWS is not the only cloud provider in the world. but to be serious with that one, so 2.2 is actually true. So the companies are relying on multiple cloud providers, first of all. And the second thing is actually something like 80% of the companies, they rely on some kind of multi-cloud solution, either multi-public cloud or hybrid solution, like a local data center and a public cloud. Now, as a SaaS provider, my life looks good unless I would like to win a customer that doesn't run, I don't know, on AWS, but runs on another cloud provider. If my SaaS cloud is, my SaaS solution is deployed on AWS, for example, and then you run, Michael, on Azure or GCP, or you have something. So this is actually the first challenge, right? So, and I already told in couple of shows before, I work with a lot of startups. Startups would like to go after the big logos, right? And they will do anything to get the big enterprise deal. And one of those things that enterprise will come with in front of the startup is, I like your product. I like what your SaaS solution is doing. We need that, but this needs to run in my account, be it AWS or anywhere else, right? And now, so this is actually the moment where you either say, no, we have only one account. Our solution is actually kind of pool, and all of my tenants run on one account or on one solution. What actually rather happens is that company, they want to win that. So we need, as a solutions architect, we need to provide a solution on how to do that. Let me also kind of just highlight a little bit, what are the reasons, right? So when I work with those startups and when they talk to their customers, let's say, enterprises, One of the reasons is usually compliance. You have regulatory requirements. You say, data residency, my data needs to be in Germany. I like your solution, and I like that it's in, I don't know, deployed somewhere else, but it needs to be in my country. So the other reason is sometimes I work with SaaS solutions that are utilizing a lot of data. Moving a lot of data outside of one cloud provider to another cloud provider, it's not very cost effective, right? So it actually induces cost. There is always, costs that are induced by your data leaving the cloud. So it's not actually very much cost effective. Sometimes it's also, so that's the second reason. The third reason is integration requirements. SaaS lives of good integration with other tools, and sometimes you need to integrate with the tools from your tenant, from your customer that are actually in their network, let's say on premise. So you need to bridge that solution. Fourth one that I see is usually sometimes you have non-tech constraints, right? And non-tech constraints is that I see that quite often, that it doesn't fit company culture to go into cloud. They have everything on premise and they would like to continue working on premise or whatever. It's a manufacturing job and they don't want data to leave that manufacturing plants. So those would be kind of, 4 top reasons that I see when we try to win, or when a startup SaaS solution tries to win kind of, a big logo. So enterprise, it's compliance, it's cost effectiveness. You cannot move a lot of data, so cheaply, and it's not actually kind of, easy integration requirements and non-tech constraints.
Well, and there's
not. Let me chime in here. Then I could chime in here. I think most of the compliance things are actually solvable also when a SaaS provider, in the realms of the regulatory boundary, like in the different countries or different AWS region in our speech. But I think there are some things that are less negotiable, let's call it. And these are things like the manufacturing plants, right? Sometimes there is really the need of super low latency because, this steers machinery at the shop floor. Or maybe there is also the concern that if there is a network outage, then, large plants will just stand still. And this is something that can incur enormous financial losses for the customer. So that's, I think, very valid concerns they may bring forward. Or in other cases, I think it's IP leakage that I hear pretty often, right? So, I mean, there are probably data that are not super sensitive, and that's okay to bring them to a SaaS provider's estate on the cloud. But there are other things that the company is, super scared to give out of their hands, because this is actually what is the foundation of this company. And if that leaks intentionally or through a malicious attack or whatsoever, this would be, a significant damage or brand reputation or both. And I think these are, I think we need to differentiate of what is potentially negotiable. All right, if I bring forward attestations or certifications or whatsoever, and what is really a hard fact that will probably not can be not addressed in one way or the other. And then there is a really solid reason for thinking of a deployment outside of the SaaS vendors' realms.
I will add. Go ahead.
Go, Kamal, sorry.
I was just going to keep adding to the Marcus point of list. You pointed out compliance, cost, and other things. You've also mentioned non-tech. Marcus started talking about manufacturing, one of the technical requirements. I'll add a couple of more examples that we see in the field. One is observability providers. They typically, nobody, like when observability providers are building the solution, it makes no sense for them to ask their customers to run all of their workloads in their account. That makes no sense. And so they technically have to offer something where they can, even if they're offering a hosted solution with respect to observability, they still need they need to talk about only the observability data. And so they still need to put something run something in the customer's account to be able to streamline that or stream that information, relevant information, and not everything. And so that's one use or one area we see. Security is another area we see.
Total?
Yeah, security is another area we see similarly, because you're running some sort of a let's say defensive threat analysis or anything like that, and you have applications that needs to run. Now again, you cannot ask people to run their entire workloads in a vendor's account, and so you have to run and then application or this software detection mechanism in the customer's account, and only stream the I guess the incidents information to the ISV account, right? And so those are very typical accepted models in the relevant sectors, and I think they are so widely adopted by the respective vendors in each of these things that people don't like to deviate from it, because otherwise you will be essentially, if you're a new provider in that space and you're trying to change something, then you will be caught in the CISO jail with every company that you are trying to sell to. And so people don't try to, or ISVs don't try to muck with that, and they try to follow the lane on that, because that's a well-accepted distribution mechanism on those areas.
And but I wanted to add, it fits exactly, now after what you said, Kamal. Whatever your decision, if you go in that direction, will also have a technology and architecture. It will influence your technology choice, and it will influence your architecture, right? We will talk probably later about deployment models and how that looks like and things like that. But you could actually be very strict, and I saw also companies like that are saying, no, we are actually not. We have only one solution that is actually hosted in our account, and you can actually live with it or forget it, right? So they don't, or majority goes in a different direction of trying to find a solution how to win that customer and deploy workload or part of the workload in their customer account. Now that actually influenced now suddenly what they had before, or if they didn't plan with SaaS anywhere, or bring your own cloud concept from the very beginning.
What I would like to add here is that, I mean, now that we heard a lot of concern, it feels like, hey, it should be obvious that this needs to be deployed in the account or in the infrastructure environment of a customer. But fundamentally, we should also not lose an eye on the value proposition of SaaS. And the value proposition of SaaS includes things like, hey, we want to bring time to value, right? We want to ship new features to customers as fast as possible. So we should all, their application should be kind of always evergreen, basically. While at the same time we want to reduce, as a software vendor, the situation that we have multiple versions in the field, and it's a nightmare for our support and our whole tech organization to maintain these different versions for a very long period of time. So I think this needs to be a fine balance, or the technical solution at least needs to address these points, so that we are not fully reverting to a model that is basically just sell me the license and I will do the rest on my own as a customer.
Yeah. You still need to be SaaS, right? So you still need to kind of be able to control all your deployments. And there are ways. I mean, I think Kamal, you're expert on that. We will come into that bit as well. So not to rush in immediately.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to add for now that there are so many variations of it. It's worthwhile probably talking about it at some point in the discussion, because there are quite a bit of variation from complete offline mode to completely managed mode, to Marcus' point, and what does it entail? What are the common patterns that we see the ISVs taking when they are building solutions like that?
Well, actually, I think now is the right time for that, and so that's actually the question I was about to ask you, which is, we understand the core concept of SaaS in terms of it's a Snapchat where, hey, I've got this app, I use the app, it does things for me and life is good. If we can start at the kind of the concept of Snapchat and work all the way down to BYOC or BYOA or the Databricks model. There's very few people on earth who have more experience in all of that than Kamal. So Kamal, can you walk us through those and why you do each?
Yeah, I think there are variations when it comes to um, deploying and even in customers account. There are let me just go over at a very high level. I'd love to get opinion from the panel as well. There are cases where we see that you are in completely sovereign cloud, you are completely in a highly regulated environment, you have a private data center which is completely disconnected, you are trying to do something which is in government gov cloud or FedRAMP, and you do require really even there are certain, like if you go to IL6 and IL7 on Department of Defense, you're not allowed to have any internet connection, even outbound. And so there is it's physically practically not possible to offer a SaaS or managed solution uh, uh, by the vendor, like sitting remote, right? And so in that case, often vendors adhere to or switch to on the offline mechanisms. They try to simulate as much as of the managed experience that they can provide, but it's never going to match the experience that one can get when they have a when they can have a when they can enable the access for the vendor to provide a fully managed experience. And so there is a what we call at least or what we see in the industry is like an on-prem distribution model. It's also one of the very oldest and traditional distribution model that out there in the industry. We used to, I mean, practically historically, we have been for 30 years, we have been licensing the software and distributing the software. Um, I still remember the days on the floppy disk and CD disks we used to get, and the one we to do today is probably enhanced version of that, but it's practically the same concept that you're essentially getting a license. But even there, a lot of advancement has happened. Like it's not simply these days that you just get the software with a license key. Most of the vendors do a much better and streamlined job than that. They make it easier for their customers to still get a one-click installer, so they don't have to read the entire manual handbook of following the 500 pages and do the deployment of certain thing. So it goes back to the fundamentals of even SaaS, like conceptually, that how can you drive the consumption faster? The more the customers will use it, the earlier the customers will be able to use it, the faster they will be able to get the upgrade, the faster they will be able to new features, the better it is. So the concept still applies even on the on-prem side, and the mechanisms still exist, although they are limited in some ways because, as I said, of the nature of the on-prem distribution model itself. But on the ISVs, or let me put it this way: the modern day ISVs do provide proper on-prem distribution mechanism to make it easier for their customers to get installs, to get the newer upgrades, to streamline the whole troubleshooting and support process end to end, right? And there are there are ways, uh, like in a SaaS world, there are managed ways, and you typically expect where you can just go and do the deployment and manage your thing on the portal and everything, or access the application. In the on-prem distribution model, you are essentially, as I said, get an installer. You can customize how you want your deployment to look like. And once you customize your deployment, you can get a one-click installer. You can still track what deployment parameters you have chosen, what version you have chosen, and can get notified by the ISVs on when the newer versions are available. So you can go back to it, you can look at the newer versions, you can upgrade to the newer versions quickly, and manage your license and cost all from one place, right? And so a lot of similarly, the experience on the troubleshooting, whenever they need help, there are proper mechanism to report the issue without requiring a constant connection between the customer and the ISV vendor, right? Essentially. And so that That's one model that we typically see. Now, the other model on the other hand side, completely we see is the classic BYOC, which is one of the very popular models, I think, which is also what we refer to SaaS Anywhere. Although SaaS Anywhere, in my opinion, is much broader concept. It refers to everything under umbrella, but and so BYOC, or the way we see it, is customers bring their own cloud. And so these earlier I still remember 10, 15 years ago, it used to be that the definition of BYOC was a little bit murkier, but I think the industry is now channeling it down to that BYOC is actually bring your own cloud account. And the cloud account has become essentially equivalent to bringing your own cloud in some ways. So somebody who is not familiar, please note that it's actually bring your own cloud account in the newer definition of the world. So because you're bringing your cloud account, that essentially means that you are bringing your cloud to the ISV so that they can deploy the application in a managed way and provide the same SaaS-like experience while deploying the application in your account. And so you still get the benefits of full manageability. You still get the benefit of, ideally the vendor will take care of the upgrades and management of the entire software and application, including infrastructure and billing. And so you can focus on just your application start and just using the underlying application or underlying software that you're getting from the vendor to achieve your business purpose, right? And then comes the array of solutions in between. By the way, there is the BYOA, there is bring your own VPC, there is bring your own Kubernetes, and there are all kind of variations on that. I'm happy to chat on that, but I think the one that we often find people confusing, I'll just quickly just say one line on that, which is a bring your own account versus bring your own cloud. So the new definition where the industry is now narrowing down to, when people talk about BYOA, they typically mean that they are bringing just their data, like Snowflake or Databricks serverless version, where essentially they are just bringing their data from the cloud account, not the compute. The compute is still running in the ISV's account. And so that is typically now an accepted definition of the BYOA. And when you're bringing BYOC, you're essentially saying, I'm bringing my own full cloud account. You run the full compute, full data, everything in the customer's end customer's cloud account, essentially. So that's often the different variations of them. Now, the principles applied, how the security and networking is done, is actually very different in each one of these cases. There are consideration that needs to be made. You cannot just simply say, hey, on-prem requirement from the technical point of view is same as BYOA or BYOC or other variations of it. There are 100% several nuances to it, and the people who are interested, maybe we can have a separate session. We can cover some of it later in the session. But yeah, that's how I see it. What do you guys think? Long answer.
I do think for anyone listening in, Kamal has written some great blogs on this topic. So, visit Omnistrate and read some of those blogs. Armen, one of the things I did want to bring back to this, though, is your statement of 2.2 clouds and Marcus's statement of on-prem. And so if I'm deploying my agentic system, it's a system that needs data from maybe Databricks running on AWS and some old SQL databases running on-prem. And so walk us through what it takes to balance the different deployment models that Kamal was talking about, as well as managing the different places where you're going to, where your agentic system is pulling data from.
Mm. So Kamal already kind of laid out groundwork, right? So when Kamal was actually talking about, or all of us deploying something at your customer account or at your customer cloud, we were talking about application plane, right? So just to clarify that, so each SaaS solution consists out of two parts, and maybe I'm actually covering the basics here, but one is actually something that we call application plane. This is actually where your customer, where your tenant is getting value from. This is actually where you provide value to your customer. And there is another complete separate, usually application. It could be done also with a different technology stack. It's called a control plane. And this is actually application that controls all those things that you need to control, like, I don't know, payment, tenant provisioning, tenant management, observability. Kamal, you mentioned that.
Deployment, infrastructure.
Well, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So this is actually, and this is what you do. What's your bread and butter in Omnistrate anyway. So I guess looking forward to hear a little bit more about it. But when we were talking about now providing value to your customer, I like to split that into 3 different deployment models, right? So you don't need to, so one obvious thing is actually to say, okay, I'm going to deploy everything I have on the application plane at my customer account. And this is actually some like remote application plane. So you have your application plane, and then you will actually go and deploy the full application at the customer. It still needs to be connected somehow through your application plane. You still need to be able to do observability and do all those things. But what you could also do, there are other 2 models, and I always suggest customers to look at that more critically and decide, which one actually is the best for them. One would be actually distributed data stores, where you say that's if you have a customer who says my data is not leaving this particular my account, right? I will not actually let you control my data. I will not move it to your account. I had a kind of startup like that, so it's all about control. So in that case, what's enough to do is also distributed data store, which means your control plane stays with you, your application plane stays with you, except particular data that are actually staying on, I don't know, payment database or whatever, that stays with your tenant in your tenant environment. So this is actually what I call distributed data stores. Then you have a second deployment model, which is distributed application services. Now imagine you have your control plane, you have your application plane, and your application plane consists out of different functionalities. Let's say, it's microservice design or not, even not, right? But you have a different functionality. Now your customer says, this particular functionality needs to run in my production plant, and I cannot, this is actually vital, this needs to be with me. So that means that you will deploy part of your application plane, and not everything, part of your application plane at your customer account. I had a similar case where customer had to do inference on their tenants' data. Inference had to happen in the customer location, actually on premise. So the solution was actually not to deploy everything, but just that bit of software where that's also latency was actually quite important. So this was actually a solution. So we have distributed data stores, we have distributed application services, and then third pillar is actually, Kamal, what you were talking about is remote application plane, where you get your full application plane and go and deploy it at your customer account. So I'm gonna stop here because I have a feeling that I was talking forever. So I'm happy also to get your input, Marcus, because I know that you're also dealing with lot of customers that are actually have distributed SaaS.
No, I think fundamentally you basically brought it home, right? So these are the different models, and of course, I guess there is always a little bit of shades of gray. But I think if we want to put it into certain buckets and take the conversation from there, I think you put it very well.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
So if the next statement, so we've kind of set up the what and the why. I think the next statement is kind of the how. And so since we have two sets of depth here in terms of from the ISV perspective is Kamal, because he's built this company called Omnistrate, which does control plane as a service, which kind of we'll get to here in a second. And we'll kind of end the show there in terms of what is when and why would you want to outsource some of that control plane to solve some of these. But Marcus, Armen, before we get there, I mean, everybody starts building their first cloud service on AWS. It's it's the bread and butter. And so, what are kind of the first kind of core services that people are using to solve some of these issues on AWS? And then we'll kind of transition to, when is a native service versus when do you use an ISV like Omnistrate?
Cool. So let's talk about some startups, right? And SaaS is usually baked in when they build a solution from the get-go. That's unlike traditional software vendors that need to SaaSify their solution at a later stage. With startups, this is basically a core primitive that they have from the beginning. We can always discuss whether they did it in a good way or in a bad way, or but as a principle, it's there. And I think there is, and they start out. I would say, almost always see that this is a pure SaaS model. And to be honest, this is very good. Why is that good? Because from the different models that Kamal as well as Armen outlined before, there is a how to say, full SaaS, or there's a natural tension between full SaaS and a lot of AIT capabilities that a company needs to have. If everything is with the cloud vendor, with the SaaS vendor, right? A marketing person, without even asking IT, can pull out a credit card and get used, can get going, right? But the moment you have to install certain pieces of the application plane, not to speak about the full control plane in your own premises or in your own infrastructure estate, right? Then you need to have quite a bit of IT skills and capacity. So I think starting off with a pure SaaS model helps these young companies also to attract attention very quickly, because the entrance barriers are extremely low. And maybe, these are just small teams where it's not super critical to use SaaS in the first place. And just eventually it will go into other departments or in other use cases where all the things that we discussed before become a thing. So what I'm trying to get away with is that most of the companies I'm working with, they still have a pure SaaS model, which is then potentially complemented by a model where some parts of the application plane, and maybe in some extreme cases, even some parts or the whole app control plane, is deployed somewhere else. So let's dive a little bit into this from a solution perspective. So with a pure SaaS model, I think, there are lots of patterns and things around here. But usually what matters most is that you build a solution that is extremely well scalable. Because what you want to have is, not to have manual efforts every time you hit, in terms of CPU limitation, memory utilization. You want to scale as flexible as possible. And that's where the cloud provider comes in very handy with its auto-scaling functionality and with its basically unlimited size of capacity in terms of storage and so on. So I would say, and maybe, if you look at modern databases that cloud providers offer, right, they also are typically stretching the boundaries of what you can get with a single database to an extent that was not possible before or in on-premises. So this is actually the cool part of being in the cloud. So if you think about some parts are not in the cloud account of the software vendor, then you naturally need some form of connectivity between, the control plane or the remaining application plane on the cloud provider, on the SaaS provider side, versus the one that runs in a different account or in a totally different environment. And that's, usually you can start off with saying, okay, this is a network issue, right? I just connected to network somehow and that I'm good to go. But this is typically very coarse-grained, right? This means like you permit access on a very low level to potentially a wide range of So I think the more modern has developed some cool features, especially talking here about AWS, which is the cloud that I know by far the best. You have things like private link, which is a certain connectivity between resources in one account or one VPC and in another VPC across account boundaries potentially. And that is very targeted. It allows a certain type of communication, but not, leaves the door open for many other things as well. And if you want to go, if you think like, oh, networking, right? I'm a bit scared because I hear so many things going on over there. You can also think about changing the way you communicate from a network level to maybe a message communication level, right? So you can think of, okay, I communicate over message services. in AWS, for instance, EventBridge is such a typical service where you can connect two parties, even though they are not residing in the same account. And that gives you a lot of control on what is actually floating over these messages. And it's a communication channel that is then open for, kind of information that maybe the control plane will give to the application plane, like there is a new update available, please go and install it, or backwards, right? If you want to have some telemetry information, if you want to know how the application is actually used that is residing in a different account, then that can also go via some message bus. As a customer still in visibility of what's going on, and potentially you even can cut ties if you are scared. I want to touch on one more thing before we maybe move on, and this is now there is something running in a customer's account. Can I trust this thing? Right, and if I'm a big ISV and I have a strong reputation in the market, maybe that's not the biggest fear. But if you're a startup, right, this is maybe a different thing, right? Maybe they trust you as a company, but how good is the software actually, right? Will it harm other applications around it because it's spins up too many resources, or is it secure, and so on and so on, or will I have a new security hole in my setup? And that's, I think, where the AWS marketplace, and as a precondition, the foundational technical review that AWS is running you through with your ISV application comes into play, right? So even though we are, clear framework in nation for security and for some other concerns, and then before it's even put onto the marketplace, and before a customer can then consider to deploy it in their own environments. I hope this makes sense.
It does. Love it. And so, Kamal, helping startups through a lot of the topics that Marcus and Armen just said is what you do for a living and what you've been doing for the last 15 years of your life. But it's why you build Omnistrate. So can you walk us through what is a control plane as a service? How does it solve some of these SaaS distribution issues, and why you're building what you're building?
Yeah, I think the general premise is very simple, which is every time we have an application, we have an idea, we have to build an application to solve that idea problem. But the question remains, how do you now take this application to and make it a product to help distribute to your customers or your tenants? So you need set of things which are common, which are like, how do you manage your tenants, how do you manage your subscription, how do you manage your deployments, how do you manage your infrastructure, how do you manage your billing, how do you manage your operations? And so these are the common questions that will come around when you are really trying to sell the product. Now, obviously, one way of doing it is a layman way is every time somebody needs a product, they can give you a phone call, and you can arrange a time with them. You can work with them to set up and install with them. And every time they need to get the upgrade, you can go and talk to them and schedule the same way. You can have a custom pricing with each one of them. You can try to do the billing, process those things manually. You can try to keep a sheet around, an Excel sheet. Here are the customers. Here's a deployment ID for it. Here is the corresponding infrastructure attached to it. The challenge is that works for first handful of the customers, startup customers we have. You can see the moment you have half a dozen or more than a dozen customers, it goes completely out of hands, because each deployment looks different, each pricing looks different. People who have done startups, they all know, there's, in the early days of the startups, you are figuring out a lot of things. And so, and you are running a lot of experiments and almost across every dimension, whether you like it or not. There is no perfect formula that anybody knows. Even the experienced founders with a lot of experience in the domain, they are building some things. They're still experimenting, and that is why it is a startup, because it has not been done, or you're trying to do something innovative or cool, or even if it is a old idea, you're trying to make it better, cheaper, and faster, or something like that. And so when you're trying to do any of these things, you're trying to do experiments, you are naturally trying out with different deployment mechanism. You're trying out with different tenant isolations. You're trying it out with different pricing structure. And so as you are, so in very, especially in the very earlier in the days, um, almost all customers have a slight variation to it. So now you can, obviously you're not going to keep it in head. You can maintain a sheet and try to keep it around. But as you can see, this is like essentially building a database with using files. Yeah, sure. If you have, try to keep, let's say, your CRM information, or you're trying to keep your, actual data information in, and try to use files to represent your database, it will work for the first handful of records. But as you will scale, you can very easily see you will need a proper a corresponding CRM database, or you'll need a proper database solution to really provide you certain guarantees right around it, and make it streamline the whole thing. Because what you don't want is you have customers lined up on the door. You are just bounded by your availability of when you can go and install. Customer have an interest, they have an intent, they went to your website, they want to click it right now, they should be able to get on it and within 5 seconds. And if they can start using the product, they start getting the value, you can start driving the consumption, you can start getting the feedback earlier, and that changes the game. The faster you can establish the build learn life cycle, where you can provide value to your customers earlier, you can get the feedback from your customers earlier, so you can iterate faster. The faster you can churn that loop faster, the better it is for your startup, in fact for any startup. And so that's is a fundamental thing that we thought everybody need. And we just realized that when you looked around for solutions, the AWS, as Marcus and Armen mentioned, have built a lot of building blocks for it. And it made, obviously, compared to 20 years ago, when AWS started, AWS has made it much simpler to build than if you have to build it completely without any building block services. Yet we feel that there when it comes from the experience point of view, not all the people have experiences knowing all the 100 services of AWS services you will need to build such a solution together, how to put it together. Because when customers are looking at it, they are looking at it from their own developer experience perspective. And so where we come in is, we instead of them have to learn all the 100 AWS services, they tell us what they want, and we essentially put it together, a solution using the AWS building blocks, so that they don't have to learn the nitty-gritties. They don't have to make the same mistakes that what people have made and learned after decades of running a production grade systems at scale. And so we take the best practices, we take the right building blocks and put the solution together, so they can go out and distribute and get to unlock the revenue and get to distribute to their customers faster. So that was the whole intent, and that's why we started Omnistrate.
If you think about it, and I think, Armen, you kind of set the stage for this, right? So the customer value, the end customer value, comes from the application plane, right? This is where he interacts with something that he perceives as useful, that will drive value to his business. And that's the reason why he embarks into this SaaS offering in the first place. But what we see is basically that there's a significant portion of work that each and every startup is doing when building out their product, which goes into the control plane, which is a necessity, right?
Yeah.
But it's not a value differentiator to the extent the application plane is.
100%.
And so, efforts and product that has been built over and over and over again by all 90% of the startups of the world, and then investing, scarce resources into it, there is value in taking something off the shelf over here, and really focus your resources on the core problem that you are trying to solve, and that makes you very distinct and unique, and potentially the next unicorn.
I wanted also just to ask Kamal, so because you're actually closer to the field when it comes to control plane, right? From my ivory tower as a solutions architect, so I always preach, right? It's not SaaS if you don't have control plane. And I know that a lot of customers start without control plane, and I was doing the same mistake in the past, but then you realize you need some kind of admin portal to do that. So that's one thing. But what I also tell them is, when we talk about BYOC or SaaS anywhere, if you need to deploy part of your application plane at your customers, you cannot give up control over your control plane. So in my kind of idealistic or puristic view of SaaS, you have only one control plane. So you need to have a control plane. You have only one control plane, and it is actually fully under your, it is mostly under your control. Let's call it like that, right? So what do you, Kamal, what do you see on the field? Because how do you handle that with your customers?
Yeah, I think I would go back to the point that Marcus was saying, right? Like control plane is not a differentiation, but if you don't have it, it gets into your way of distribution. It is like the same thing, like, for example, if I am starting a bakery business today and I'm building cakes, I'm extremely good in building excellent cakes, and everybody, all of my customers who have tried it, loved it, but I don't have any distribution mechanism. I have zero distribution. Guess what? I'm going to fail. And so this is where, does the distribution has anything to do with the how good of a cook I am, or chef I am, or cakes I have? No. But it's an essential requirement to do that. And if you take a look at different parallel industries, at least that's how I like to view it. Like YouTube and Netflix, if I see these are distribution for video streaming, FedEx and UPS for physical goods, Pandora and Spotify for music. But what about for software? It looks like software engineers and all of the technologists have solved the problem of every other domain, but they forgot about their own domain. In fact, for own they haven't forgotten it. In fact, everybody is trying to solve their own versions of it, and it feels, as a humanity, it feels idiotic at best to reinvent the same wheel again and again. And furthermore, when it comes to when incidents happen, like we saw one of the incident happened, right? And when you don't have proper control plane, like we saw one of the outages earlier, and I think there is a shared responsibility here. And I think we saw, for example, with Omnistrate, none of our customers were impacted because they were using proper control plane. I'm not just trying to say or brag about the Omnistrate control plane. I'm just saying you just need to have a proper control plane. If you don't have a control plane, don't expect the infrastructure will never go down. Like, I would argue that if you're managing your own literally hardware or data centers, AWS is providing still orders of magnitude better availability than what you could have, right? And so, and hoping that for any cloud provider, for that matter, that the underlying infrastructure will never go down. That's not possible. That's just, you are living in a false world. You have to design systems. You have a shared responsibility, and you have to design systems to be able to cope up with failures. And I think the simple answer to that is you need to have proper control plane. And if you do not have that, can't handle the resiliency, and you haven't designed your application. I mean, a control plane is not the only answer, just to be fully clarify here. You also have to design your application also accordingly, so that it can go hand in hand with a control plane. If you have for example, if you're building a database and you have only single node database, and you cannot horizontally scale the database, wow. There's nothing control plane can move that machine around. You will still have an outage. You're limited by it can limit the amount of availability downtime, but it cannot eliminate it. And so there is design requirements on the application side, but there are corresponding requirements on the application side. So that's what I would say is, did I answer your question or went on a different tangent? Maybe I can.
No, yes, and you also brought up something that I was thinking about to mention in the show, and this is actually a shared responsibility model. Now looking at the whole point as a SaaS provider, right? I'm providing service to my customer, and now suddenly I need to deploy my application plane at my customer account. Now, if you look at it like this, right? Before, my life was easy because I was controlling my database, I was controlling how many EC2 CPUs I'm gonna have, and how I'm gonna scale, and so everything was easy. But the moment when I decide to deploy part of the application plane or the full application plane at my customer account, now suddenly, right, my tenant has responsibility of high availability. They need to make sure that security is under control, redundancy is under control, that they make backups, that scalability, capacity, and resilience. So all those things are actually now a responsibility of my tenant and not mine, right? So, but if your application doesn't run properly, I will still be blamed. So I need to explain that to my tenant. And then me as a SaaS provider, I still will have my overall application responsibility. I will still need to do monitoring. I will still need to provide my tenant with application updates. I will still need to provide my tenant with a script to provision the infrastructure, right? But when that's done, the infrastructure, the scalability, security, redundancy, all those things, it's actually my tenant responsibility. And now suddenly you're actually, if your tenant is not aware of that, you potentially will have other problems.
Exactly.
I mean, we are running out of time pretty quickly, I guess, but I want to leave or hear all of you with a thought, right? We are going into this agentic age.
Yeah.
And this comes faster than we think. And I guess a lot of the things that we are talking today will still hold true, but some of them will also change. Now, think about it. One of the things that typical SaaS applications do come with is an own data store in one way or the other. There are exceptions, of course, right? But many of them come with their own data store. And basically, you have a little bit of a silo, right? Where you have a front end and a back end and a data store, and this data store is isolated. But the whole idea of this agentic age is that there is an agent that has access to all these data stores around it so that it can, I don't know, leverage all the information to make a really good, not a decision, but at least, bringing it together in a meaningful way. And I think this is the question that we maybe should leave for a next episode on how this changes the picture, because now we are not talking about a situation where you need to have let's say all the things that you just mentioned, Armen, like disaster recovery and all the things that are typically data considerations in place. But now we have to say, hey, how do we kind of distribute these agents? How can we control these agents? How can we give them access to all the things they need? And how does the deployment model for such an agent look like in the setup that we are going to see in the future?
No, I 100% agree. That's a great idea. I would also add that, we should clarify to maybe in a follow-up session also, just broadening up a little bit also, that what does a true SaaS or a good SaaS looks like? Because I think the people often misunderstand that, okay, I get a request from the customers, I can get back to them in a day or 5 days and provision something. That's SaaS. No, that is not SaaS. And so I think, what does it mean to be a true SaaS, from not only just from the deployment perspective, all the things that Armen mentioned, and Marcus, you just reiterated that. Like, what does it involve? How do you get insight? So you establish a feedback loop cycle. So you are really learning, like, what is working, what is not working, from every dimension, from operations to deployments to product features. And if you don't have that insight, you don't have that feedback cycle, that you don't have a SaaS. And so, and if you're putting the burden on your customers to do all the work, and you have friction points left, right, and center in your field, and you're kind of closing your eyes, then sure, then it's not a SaaS. And and so if you really want to get the benefits of SaaS, then you really need to embrace SaaS fully. There is no that shortcut that I have a layman version of it and no, it doesn't. You're not going to reap the benefits of it, because the whole point is that if you want to drive the engine fast and get the benefit from it, then you have to really put in the work.
Yeah. And maybe just to Marcus, both Marcus and Kamal, for the audience watching this show, so some of those questions were answered in the previous show 2 weeks ago that we had with John Lawrence. And what's actually struck me is that maybe through agent and agentic AI, our front end and our applications will become disposable, but data still persists, right? And somehow that data model and data control is more important than ever, right? So we're talking about tenant isolation. So for the people watching this show, they can also go and watch the previous one. There were a couple of very good insights on how to do those things with I think Nikhil Alok was there with John talking about those topics.
It is a fascinating topic, and the best part about being in the industry at this particular time is it's going to change by next week. So we've all been in this industry forever. We've all seen change. We've all seen change happen quickly. I don't think any of us have ever seen change happen this quickly. It's an insanely fun and fascinating time to be here. But I do think we all agree that the core premises of how to design the system correctly, those core premises have not changed. They are not less important. They're actually more important, and they're table stakes. And so you have to have a good distribution model. That the distribution model has to be rock solid, and no one's going to pay you or congratulate you for having the distribution model. That was, that's what SaaS companies got rewarded for 3 years ago or 2 years ago. Now it's all about your app, and your app better delight your customers on day one. Things are moving fast. The expectations of our customers and the expectations of their users are also moving insanely fast. And if you're not meeting your customers or your users' expectations, you're also kind of dead in market as well. And so with that, as Marcus said, we are at the top of the hour. We do kind of need to wrap it up. I'm going to wrap it up with our standard kind of question though, which is kind of what did you learn new, and since we talked to you last, what's kind of new and fun and interesting? It used to be, what's your favorite AI prompt, but that actually aged. So it can be your AI prompt or tool, or what did you see? So kind of what was your learning over the last 2 weeks? And Armen, you're on the stage already, so I want to start with you.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if I mentioned this before. I'm using mostly Perplexity for my research. So everything I do, I usually kind of put the prompt in Perplexity and talk to Perplexity about it. It could be kind of regarding my personal things, but it could be also work related. Now what I actually I was always struggling in the past with things like journaling or kind of writing retrospective on my week. What did I do in the last week? So what I discovered that Perplexity has something which is called tasks. So you can schedule those tasks. So my prompt is actually check what did we talk about in the last 7 days and summarize that into a nice email journal entry. So I get my journal every time, every Friday morning, sent in my mailbox directly from Perplexity saying, you were researching about SaaS Anywhere. You were actually, we were talking about this book, and we were actually kind of, looking into various different things, right? But I actually, or how to build AI agents, right? That was actually in my journal this morning. But I kind of, found a very nice shortcut, from what I do during the week. And then I'm using AI to summarize my work in the past 7 days and put it in my journal.
Love it. Marcus?
So with all the AI things coming up, I think one of the questions that I was facing this week, actually 2 times, is the question on how can I actually see or attribute costs to it? Because at the end of the day, all these large language models incur costs. And yes, you will see it eventually on a bill, but how can I, dissect it and say, hey, this was the, I can attribute it to a developer, I can attribute it to a team, I can attribute it to a project or a purpose. And that's something I believe there are some ways to do it, but I think it's not fully fleshed out. And it was super interesting to see or to try find different solutions to this.
Excellent, love it. I appreciate you both. For my learning this week, I'm going to say that there's been a surprising pushback on MCPs lately, primarily because they are consuming a lot of the context windows within a lot of people's development cycles. And so everyone shipped an MCP, and some of these MCPs weren't particularly well designed in terms of managing tokens. And so this MCPs there, your bot reads the whole darn thing, and now half the context window is used before anything is done. And so there's something. MCP is definitely still the future, or a concept around MCP is the future. But what we all thought was pretty solved, it doesn't look like it's solved anymore. And so there's some pushback there. There's some changes there. I don't know what those answers are, but if you kind of aren't following kind of the pushback on MCPs and the shift to managing the context window, which never gets old, that is the kind of the North Star of all things agentic. And the cost associated with putting MCPs in when you don't need them for everything is there. And so I don't know if it's that we're going to start slicing up MCPs and have specialized smaller MCPs for specific things. I don't know what the answer there is, but I know that space is changing. And I a month ago thought it was solved. It's certainly not solved. It's definitely evolving, and things are happening fast.
Yeah, it's moving crazy fast. Yeah, you're right.
Thank you, gentlemen. Great session as always. I really appreciate both of you joining as well as the insights. And we'll see everybody in 2 weeks.
Thanks a lot. See you, team. Bye.